Today I'm going to share a story that will stir your soul and bring to light deep questions about the future of humanity. Get ready to discover the journey of Magnus Hauk, a man who had a near-death experience, found answers in the arms of angels, and received a stunning revelation about what's to come on September 20th, 2024. Before you begin, leave your like, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell, because this story will leave your mouth open and you won't want to miss what's coming. Hello, my name is Magnus Hauk. I never thought I would be here telling this story, but life has its own plans, doesn't it? I was born and raised in Charleston, South Carolina, a beautiful city, full of history, but my own history wasn't always so beautiful. I come from a complicated family. My father, James, was a man with a difficult temper. The fights between him and my mother, Rose, were constant. I spent a lot of time hiding in my room trying to muffle my screams with my pillow. It wasn't easy, you know? Growing up in an environment like this leaves its mark. When I was 10 years old, everything got worse. My father got into a big fight and ended up seriously hurting someone. He was arrested for that. My mother decided it was time to call it quits. She got us out of that situation. Suddenly, chaos turned to silence. But the void? The emptiness only grew inside me. I spent years building walls around myself. I promised myself that I would never let love hurt me like that. And for a long time it worked. Or at least I thought so. In college I met Elliot. He was charming, persistent. Little by little my barriers began to break down. For the first time I felt truly loved. We spent years together, laughing, dreaming, making plans. I truly believed I had found what was missing in my life. But not everything is rosy, is it? In our third year together, I discovered that Elliot was cheating on me. It was as if the ground disappeared beneath my feet. When I confronted him, he just didn't care. As if everything we experienced meant nothing. He suggested that we end it like this, just like that. I was devastated. All those memories from my childhood, the trauma of abandonment, and now this. It was too much for me. One night, I just couldn't take it anymore. I filled a glass of drink, took a bunch of medicine. I just wanted the pain to stop, you know? My mother, Rose, always had a sixth sense about these things. She came into my room just in time. He found the empty bottles, saw me almost unconscious. He called an ambulance at the same time. I remember hearing distant voices, sirens, and then everything went dark. That's when everything changed. I had an experience that completely transformed my life, a near-death experience, and that's what I want to talk to you about. Not to shock, nor to convince anyone of anything. I just want to share what I experienced, because it completely changed the way I see the world and myself. In the next few minutes, I will tell you in detail what happened to me that night. How I went to hell and back, literally. How I found love and forgiveness where I least expected it. And how, in the end, I discovered that my journey here on earth is far from over. So if you can, take a deep breath with me. This story is intense, but I promise it's worth listening to until the end. Because in the end, it's not just about death, it's about life, purpose, and hope. Well, let's go. After everything went dark in the hospital, something strange started to happen. Suddenly I felt light, as if floating. I opened my eyes, or at least I thought I had, and found myself looking down. There I was, lying on the hospital gurney, pale as a ghost. Doctors and nurses were running back and forth, doing everything they could to bring me back. It was scary, you know? Seeing my own body there, almost lifeless. I wanted to scream, say I was okay, that I was up there, but no one could hear me. It was at that moment that I felt something pulling me. It was as if an invisible force was dragging me away from there. In the blink of an eye, the hospital was gone. Everything became dark, very dark. It wasn't like closing your eyes in a room at night. It was a dense, oppressive darkness. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel it. And what I felt was fear. A fear I had never experienced before. As I floated in this darkness, I began to hear sounds. At first they were distant, stuffy, but they were getting louder. clearer. They were screams. Screams of pain, of despair. I wanted to cover my ears, but I couldn't. The sounds seemed to come from inside my head. And then, in the middle of all that darkness, I saw it. A huge door made of fire. The flames danced, forming strange patterns. It was mesmerizing and terrifying at the same time. Near the door, there was... well, I'm not sure how to describe it. They were creatures. They weren't human, that's for sure. They had distorted shapes, faces that seemed to be constantly changing. They guarded the door as if they were waiting for something or someone. I didn't want to go near that door. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to run away. But the force pulling me was too strong. No matter how much I struggled, I kept heading towards that fiery door. As I passed it, the heat hit me like a wave. It wasn't the normal heat of a hot summer day. It was a heat that seemed to burn my soul. And what I saw on the other side, my God, it was a scene of pure suffering. There were people, or what once were people, bound by chains. They writhed, screamed, begged for help. The floor was covered in some kind of dark, sticky substance. The air was filled with smoke and a terrible smell that I can't even describe. I wanted to help those souls. I wanted to free them, but I couldn't move. It was as if I too were trapped, unable to do anything but watch all the suffering. At that moment, I understood. That was hell, not the hell of the movies or the comics. It was real, tangible, and I was there. The feeling of despair was overwhelming. I thought I would be trapped there forever, condemned to witness this eternal torment. But something inside me, a very small voice in the back of my mind, reminded me of something. Prayer. I had never been a very religious person, you know. But at that moment, I started to pray. They were not elaborate or beautiful words. It was a simple, desperate plea. God, please help me. And that's when everything changed again. On the horizon of that terrible place, I saw a light. A bright blue light that seemed to be getting bigger and bigger. That light brought hope. And with it came something, or rather someone, that would change everything. But that's another part of the story. A part that still moves me every time I remember it. If you want, I can tell you what happened next. How I was rescued from that place and what I saw next. Because, believe me, what came next was as incredible as hell was scary. So, like I was saying, that blue light on the horizon, it was unlike anything I'd ever seen. In the middle of that terrible place, she seemed so out of place, but at the same time so... right. It was like she should have always been there, you know? The light got bigger and bigger, approaching quickly. And then, I saw it. From the light, a being that I can only describe as an angel descended. But it wasn't one of those cute little angels you see on Christmas cards, no. This angel was immense, imposing. Its wings seemed to stretch for miles, glowing with an energy I had never seen before. The angel introduced herself as Ariel. Your voice, how can I explain? It was as if 1,000 bells were ringing at the same time, but in a way that didn't hurt your ears. It was comforting and powerful at the same time. Ariel reached out her hand to me, and the moment I touched her, I felt instant relief. All the fear, all the pain I was feeling in that horrible place just disappeared. It was like diving into an ocean of peace after being in the middle of a storm. The angel surrounded me in a pillar of light. It was hot, but not like the suffocating heat of hell. It was a welcoming warmth, like a hug. As we climbed, I saw that whole scenario of suffering behind us. The souls in chains, the screams of agony, everything became more and more distant. As we climbed, I began to feel something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. It was as if every meter we moved away from that horrible place brought back a little of my humanity, of my essence. During the climb, Ariel spoke to me. His voice was gentle but firm. He told me that what I had seen was real, but that it was not my final destination. Magnus, He said, "You have a choice to make. Your journey on Earth is not yet over." I was confused. What do you mean, a choice? What do you mean? I had just been rescued from hell and now I was being told I could go back? Part of me wanted to stay there in that light, forever. It was safe, it was peaceful. But another part knew there was something more waiting for me. While I was thinking about all this, we arrived at a place, well, calling it a place might not be the right word. It was more like a state of being. Everything around me was light, but not a blinding light. It was soft, welcoming. I could see colors I didn't even know existed. That's where Ariel left me. He said his mission was to rescue me, but that the next step in my journey would be with another guide. Before leaving, he placed his hand on my forehead. The moment he touched me, I felt a wave of love so intense that I almost fell to my knees. It was an unconditional, pure love, something I had never experienced before. After Ariel left, I stayed there, floating in that space of light. I no longer had a physical body, at least not as we know it. It was more like I was a floating consciousness, and in that state I started to notice things. Memories of my life flashed before me, but not in a chronological way. It was as if I could see my entire existence at once. I saw the happy times of my childhood, before things got bad at home. I saw the times I unintentionally hurt people, and the times I was hurt. I saw my successes and failures. But most importantly, I saw how all these experiences were interconnected, how each moment had led me there. At that moment, I understood that every choice we make, every interaction we have, has a much greater impact than we imagine. I saw how small acts of kindness I had done had changed the lives of people I no longer remembered, and I saw how moments when I had been selfish or cruel had caused waves of negativity. It was quite a revelation, you know, seeing your whole life like this all at once. It's the kind of thing that changes you forever. But what came after? Well, that was even more transformative, because that's where I found him. And when I say him, well, I think you can already imagine who I'm talking about, right? As I stood there, taking in everything I had seen about my life, I felt a presence. It's hard to explain, but it was as if the entire environment around me had suddenly changed. The light became even more intense, more alive. And then, he was there. Jesus. Not the Jesus of church paintings or Hollywood films. This was real. More real than anything I had ever experienced in my life. He didn't need to introduce himself. I just knew who he was. Your face. How can I describe it? It was as if all the faces I had ever loved in my life were combined into one. There was a familiarity there, but at the same time, it was something completely new and overwhelming. Your eyes. My God, your eyes. It was like he could see through me, know every thought, every secret I had ever had. But there was no judgment there. Just love. A love so pure and intense that it almost hurt. When he spoke, it was not with words. It was more like his thoughts flowed directly into my mind. And the first thing I felt was an apology. Can you believe this? Jesus was apologizing to me. He said he was sorry for all the suffering I had gone through in my life. My parents' fights, the betrayal, the depression. He had seen it all. And he had cried with me at every moment. But he also showed me something else. He showed me how every experience, even the painful ones, had shaped me. How they had prepared me for something bigger. Magnus, he told me, your journey on Earth is not yet over. There is much more for you to do. I admit I was a little scared by this. To go back? After everything I had seen and felt there? It seemed crazy. But Jesus, he smiled. And in that smile, I saw all the love in the universe. Don't be afraid, he told me. I will be with you every step of the way. He then spoke to me about forgiveness. It showed me how the resentment I carried was hurting me more than the people I blamed. I saw my father. I saw Elliot. I saw all the people I thought had wronged me. And for the first time, I was able to see them with compassion. I understood that they were also fighting their own battles, carrying their own burdens. Jesus taught me that forgiving does not mean forgetting or approving of what was done. It means freeing yourself. Free yourself from anger, resentment, bitterness. And in that moment, I felt like a huge weight had been lifted off my shoulders. He also talked about purpose. It showed me that each life has a meaning, an important role in the grand plan of the universe, and that my role, well, was yet to come. There was something important I needed to do, something only I could accomplish. As we talked, if I can call that exchange of ideas and feelings a conversation, the environment around us changed. Suddenly we were at the edge of a serene lake. The water was such a pure blue that it seemed unreal. Trees with vibrantly colored flowers surrounded us, and the air was filled with fragrances I didn't even know existed. Jesus invited me to walk with him by the lake. As we walked, he showed me things about the universe, about life, about love, that I had never imagined before. It was as if all the wisdom of the cosmos was being poured into my mind. At the same time, I felt small and insignificant, but also immensely loved and important. On the horizon, I saw something that took my breath away. Huge, golden gates, shining with their own light. And near them, people dressed in white, waiting to enter. Jesus explained to me that this was the home of many who had completed their earthly journeys. But he made it clear that it was not my time to cross those gates. Not yet. I confess I was a little disappointed. Part of me wanted to stay there forever in that peace, in that love. But Jesus gently reminded me of my purpose, the importance of my return. Magnus, he told me, you have experienced divine love. Now your mission is to bring some of that love back to the world. People need to know that they are not alone, that they are loved unconditionally. As he spoke, I felt a certainty growing within me. A certainty that no matter what happened when I got back, I would never truly be alone again. That love I had experienced would always be with me, guiding me, strengthening me. But before I could turn back, Jesus told me there was one more thing I needed to see. Something that would change not only my life, but potentially the future of all humanity. And it was then that he introduced me to another being, an entity of light that brought with it a message for the future. A message that years later I would still be trying to fully decipher. After my encounter with Jesus, I thought nothing could surprise me anymore. But he was wrong. What came next was something that, to this day, I have trouble putting into words. Jesus made a gesture, and suddenly, another being appeared next to us. It was different from anything I had ever seen so far. He was not an angel like Ariel, nor did he have a human form like Jesus. It was pure light, but somehow I could feel it was a conscious entity. This being of light communicated with me not through words or thoughts, but through sensations, images, pure knowledge that simply appeared in my mind. It was as if, for a moment, I could see and understand things far beyond my normal understanding. The being of light began to show me visions. At first they were confusing images, flashes of places and times I didn't recognize. But then, everything became clear. I saw a city, but it was no ordinary city. It was a golden city, ancient and majestic. The buildings were of a design I had never seen before, mixing elements that seemed both futuristic and incredibly ancient. The streets were paved with something that looked like liquid gold, reflecting the light in a way that made the entire city shine. The being of light made me understand that this city was not just a vision from heaven or some spiritual place. It was a real, physical place that existed here on Earth a long, long time ago, an advanced civilization that flourished even before the beginning of our recorded history. As I watched in amazement, the being of light began to transmit information to me about this city and its inhabitants. They were highly evolved beings, both technologically and spiritually. They had knowledge that made our modern science seem like child's play. I saw enormous libraries full of information about the universe, about the nature of reality, about the hidden potential of the human mind. I saw machines that could cure any disease, technologies that could produce clean, unlimited energy, systems that allowed instantaneous communication across vast distances. But the most impressive thing was their spiritual knowledge. They understood the interconnectedness of all things, the nature of consciousness, the mysteries of life and death in a way that we, in our modern society, have barely begun to scratch the surface of. The being of light made me understand that this civilization has not completely disappeared. Some of its members, the guardians of knowledge, still exist. They have been watching humanity, waiting for the right moment to make contact again. And then, I received the information that changed everything. September 20th, 2024. On this date, something important would happen. The Guardians would make contact with humanity again. It would be the beginning of a new era of discoveries and advances for our species. I confess that I was a little scared by this information. It was a lot of responsibility. Why was I being chosen to receive this message? The being of light, sensing my apprehension, gave me a sense of calm and confidence. It made me understand that each of us has a unique role to play in the grand plan of the universe, and that this was mine. Jesus, who had been silent throughout this entire experience, placed his hand on my shoulder. "Magnus," he said, "you have seen beyond the veil. You have seen the distant past and a glimpse of the future. Now your mission is to take this message of hope back to the world." I wanted to ask 1,000 questions. How should I prepare for this event? What exactly would happen that day? But before I could ask any questions, the being of light began to walk away. The visions of the Golden City gradually disappeared. Jesus smiled at me once again. "Remember," he said, "you are not alone on this journey. Knowledge will come to you when it is needed. Trust the process." And with those words, I felt like my time in that realm was coming to an end. The light around me began to dim, and I felt a force pulling me back. It was time to return. As I began my journey back into the physical world, I carried with me not only the memories of these incredible experiences, but also a sense of purpose and responsibility that I had never felt before. I knew my life would never be the same again, and that the future, not just mine but that of all humanity, was about to change in ways I could barely imagine. Getting back into my body was, well, it was quite an experience. One moment I was there, in that realm of light, surrounded by unconditional love and cosmic knowledge. The next, I was back in my physical body, lying in a hospital bed, with tubes and wires everywhere. The first thing I felt was pain. A lot of pain. My entire body hurt, as if I had been hit by a truck. My throat was dry and irritated from the breathing tube. Opening my eyes was a challenge. The light in the hospital room, dim as it was, seemed blinding after the soft glow on the other side. But along with the physical pain came an overwhelming sense of life. I could feel every beat of my heart, every breath, as if it were the first time. It was like I was experiencing my own body in a whole new way. The first person I saw when I finally opened my eyes was my mother, Rose. She was sitting next to my bed, holding my hand. His eyes were red and swollen from crying, but when he saw me awake, his face lit up with a smile that I will never forget. "Magnus," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "You're back." I wanted to tell her everything right away. About hell, about Ariel, about Jesus and the being of light, about the Golden City and the date of September 20th, 2024. But when I tried to speak, I realized I couldn't. The tube in my throat prevented it. Doctors and nurses soon filled the room. They seemed surprised and relieved to see me awake. I heard snippets of conversations about how I had been on the other side, longer than they thought safe, about how my chances of survival were slim. In the days that followed, as I recovered physically, I had a lot of time to reflect on everything that had happened. The experience was so vivid in my mind, every detail as clear as if it had happened just minutes ago. But I soon realized that telling this experience would not be easy. When I was finally able to speak and tried to explain to my mother what had happened, I saw the confusion and worry in her eyes. She smiled kindly and said she was glad I was back, but I could tell she thought it was all my imagination, maybe side effects from the medications. The doctors weren't much different. When I mentioned my experience, they exchanged looks that I knew well. It was the same look people gave when they thought someone was crazy or delusional. They talked about hallucinations caused by a lack of oxygen to the brain and chemical reactions that can simulate spiritual experiences. But I knew deep in my soul that what I had experienced was real. More real than anything I had ever experienced in my normal life. In the quiet moments when I was alone in the hospital room, I could almost feel the presence of Jesus beside me. I could hear his words echoing in my mind. You are not alone on this journey. And then there was the date. September 20th, 2024. It was burned into my mind like a fire. I knew something important would happen that day, something that would change the world. But how could I explain this to people without sounding completely crazy? As the days passed and my physical strength returned, I began to feel changes in myself that went beyond the physical. I saw the world differently now. Colors seemed more vibrant, sounds richer. I could feel a connection to the people around me that I had never noticed before. And most importantly, I was no longer afraid of death. Experience had shown me that death was not the end, but only a transition. It gave me a peace and courage I had never known before. When I was finally released from the hospital, I left with a clear mission: to prepare myself in the world for what was to come. I didn't know exactly how I would do it, but I was sure I would find the way. As I left the hospital, leaning on my mother's arm, I looked up at the sky. The sun was shining, and for a moment it seemed to have the same golden glow as the city I had seen. I smiled, knowing that my true journey was just beginning. The months that followed my release from the hospital were, to say the least, intense. It was like I was learning to live again, but this time with a completely different playbook. The first thing I noticed was how my perception of the world had changed. Everything seemed more alive. The colors were more vibrant, the sounds clearer. I could spend hours looking at a simple flower, marveling at its complexity and beauty. It was as if I was seeing the world for the first time, with new eyes. But it wasn't just the physical things that I saw differently. I started to notice people in a way I never had before. It was as if I could see beyond the masks we all wear, straight to the essence of each person. I saw the pain hidden behind fake smiles, the kindness disguised as rudeness, the fear masked as arrogance. This new realization made me rethink many of the relationships in my life. I started to see my father in a different way. Instead of anger at the way he had treated us, I felt compassion. I could see the scared and hurt man behind the aggressive behavior. And Elliot? Well, thinking about him didn't hurt anymore. I understood that his betrayal was not about me, but about his own insecurities and fears. Forgiving him was one of the most freeing acts I have ever experienced. But not everything was easy. There were days when I felt completely out of place in this world. How do you live a normal life after having experienced what I experienced? How do you worry about paying bills or traffic when you've seen infinity? And then there was the matter of the date, September 20th, 2024. It was always on my mind, a constant reminder that something important was coming. But what exactly? And how should I prepare? These questions kept me awake many nights. I decided that I needed to do something with all this knowledge and experience I had received. I started looking for ways to help others. I volunteered at a local hospice, spending time with people who were at the end of their lives. I was able to share with them, not in words but in presence, the peace I had found in relation to death. I also started meditating regularly. I discovered that through meditation I could almost touch that realm of light that I had experienced. It wasn't the same, of course, but it helped me maintain a connection to that experience, to remember that there was more to life than what we could see with our physical eyes. My relationship with spirituality has completely changed. Before, I was skeptical of anything religious. Now I saw the truth in all spiritual traditions. It was no longer a question of believing or not believing. I knew. But this certainty brought its own challenges. It was difficult to talk about these things with most people. When I tried to share my experience, I was usually met with skepticism or worse, pity. People thought I had freaked out after my near-death experience. My mother, bless her heart, tried to understand. She didn't really believe what I said I had experienced, but she could see the positive change in me. No matter what happened there, she told me one day, I'm glad I brought you back to me. I started looking for other people who had similar experiences. I discovered that there was a whole community of people who had experienced NDEs. Hearing their stories, sharing experiences, was incredibly comforting. For the first time since returning, I didn't feel alone. But even among these people, my experience was unique. No one talked about a golden city or a specific date in the future anymore. This only increased my sense of responsibility. Whatever was going to happen on September 20th, 2024, I knew I had an important role to play. As time passed, I began to feel a growing urgency. It was no longer enough to just live my life differently. I needed to do more. I needed to prepare people in some way for what was coming. It was then that I decided to start speaking publicly about my experience, not to convince anyone or to become some kind of spiritual guru, but simply to plant seeds, to make people think, question, open up to possibilities beyond what we consider normal. It wasn't easy. I faced a lot of skepticism, ridicule, and even hostility. But I also found people who were hungry for this kind of message, people who felt there was something more to life and were looking for answers. And so, day after day, I continued, living in this world, but always with one foot in that other realm that I had experienced, always with my eyes on the horizon, waiting, preparing for whatever the future brought. Because I knew one thing for sure, September 20th, 2024 was coming. And with it, a change that would affect not just my life, but potentially the lives of all humanity. And I would be ready. The years following my near-death experience were a roller coaster of emotions, challenges, and discoveries. Each day brought new revelations, new tests of my faith and determination. One of the biggest changes was in my career. Before NDE, I worked in marketing, always focused on moving up the corporate career ladder, but now it seemed so insignificant. How could I worry about quarterly reports and sales goals when I knew there was a greater purpose waiting for me? I decided to make a radical change. I quit my job, much to my mother's horror, and began studying psychology and philosophy. I wanted to better understand the human mind, the nature of consciousness. I wanted tools to help people expand their perceptions of reality. It wasn't easy. Going back to school after years out of school, dealing with complex concepts while still processing my own experience. There were times when I thought about giving up. But whenever doubt arose, I remembered what I had experienced, the unconditional love I had felt. This gave me strength to continue. My relationships have also gone through big changes. Some friendships dissolved, people who couldn't deal with the new Magnus, who thought I had become too strange. But other friendships deepened in ways I had never experienced before. And then I met Sarah. She was one of the few people who didn't look at me like I was crazy when I talked about my experience. In fact, she had her own spiritual experiences to share. With Sarah, for the first time since my NDE, I felt truly understood. Our relationship blossomed quickly. It was as if our souls recognized each other from some past life. We got married 2 years after we met, in a simple but deeply spiritual ceremony. Sarah supported me when I decided to start giving talks about my experience. At first, these were small groups in local community centers. But little by little, the word spread. I started to be invited to bigger events, conferences on consciousness and spirituality. Not everyone welcomed my message, of course. I faced a lot of resistance, especially from more skeptical and scientific circles. I was called a charlatan, a madman, a liar. There were times when these criticisms affected me deeply. But Sarah was always there to remind me of my purpose. You're not here to convince everyone, she told me. You're here to plant seeds. Some will germinate now, others may take years, some may never sprout, and that's okay. Over time, I learned to deal better with skepticism and criticism. In fact, I began to see this as an opportunity for dialogue. I didn't have all the answers, far from it. But he had an experience to share, and he was willing to discuss it openly. As the years passed, I began to notice subtle changes in the world around me. More and more people seemed to be opening up to ideas beyond pure materialism. Science was beginning to explore areas that had previously been considered purely spiritual. Concepts like quantum consciousness and universal interconnection were becoming more mainstream. I couldn't help but wonder if this had any bearing on what was to come on September 20th, 2024. Are we, as a society, unconsciously preparing for some kind of evolutionary leap? Meanwhile, my own spiritual journey continued. Through meditation and contemplative practices, I was able to access states of consciousness that approximated what I had experienced during my NDE. It was never exactly the same, nothing compared to that experience of love and total connection, but they were powerful glimpses that kept me connected to that greater reality. Sarah and I had 2 children, a girl and a boy. Raising them was a transformative experience in itself. How do you explain the meaning of life, the purpose of existence, to young and curious minds? How do you prepare them for a world that is on the brink of potentially massive change? We decided to be honest with them early on. We share our beliefs, our experiences, but always emphasizing that they should discover their own truth. Watching them grow up with open minds and compassionate hearts was one of the greatest joys of my life. As we approached 2024, I felt a growing sense of anticipation. It wasn't anxiety or fear, but a kind of readiness, as if my entire being was preparing for something monumental. I started having vivid dreams about the Golden City. Sometimes I would wake up with insights or information that seemed to come out of nowhere. I wrote everything down, trying to put together the pieces of the puzzle. Sarah noticed my growing intensity. "Remember," she would often tell me, "whatever happens, we are in this together. You are not alone." And she was right. I was not alone. I had my family, my friends, a growing community of people who were open to new possibilities. And, of course, there was that constant presence that I had felt since my NDE, that unconditional love that was always with me. So, as the days passed and September 20th, 2024 approached, I felt ready. Ready for whatever came. Ready for the next chapter of this incredible journey we call life. Little did I know that what was to come would exceed even my wildest expectations. As the year 2024 progressed, I felt a change in the air. It wasn't something I could explain rationally, but it was as real as the ground beneath my feet. It was as if the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for something monumental. My dreams became more intense and frequent. Almost every night I visited the Golden City in my sleep. Sometimes I walked its bright streets. Other times I talked to beings of light who reminded me of what I had experienced during my NDE. I always woke up with a feeling of urgency, as if I had received an important message but couldn't remember exactly what. Sarah, my anchor in this storm of emotions and experiences, helped me stay grounded. "Remember," she would say, "whatever lies ahead, our job is to be present here and now." His words centered me, reminded me that no matter what the future held, we still had a life to live in the present. Our children, now teenagers, watched everything with a mixture of curiosity and age-appropriate skepticism. They had grown up hearing about my experience and the approaching date, but I don't think they had ever really believed that something extraordinary could happen. Seeing them deal with the growing expectations in their own way was humbling. In the world around us, things also seemed to be changing. News of surprising scientific advances began to emerge more frequently. Discoveries in quantum physics that challenged our understanding of reality. Breakthroughs in medicine that bordered on the miraculous. It was as if humanity was taking giant steps towards a new level of understanding. At the same time, there has been a notable increase in interest in spirituality and expanded consciousness. Meditation and mindfulness practices have become mainstream. More and more people were reporting spiritual awakening experiences. It was as if an invisible wave was sweeping across the planet, preparing people for something greater. As September approached, my speaking and workshop schedule became full. People from all corners of the world wanted to hear about my experience, about what I thought could happen. I did my best to share what I knew, always emphasizing that I didn't have all the answers. "We're all on this journey together," I said. "My role is not to be a guru or a prophet, but simply to share my experience and encourage everyone to be open to possibilities." In the first week of September, I had a dream that shook me to my core. In it, I was back in that moment with the being of light, reliving the vision of the Golden City. But this time there was something different. A voice, or perhaps it was more of a sensation, told me, "The veil is thin. Prepare to see beyond." I woke up with those words echoing in my mind. I shared the dream with Sarah, who hugged me tightly. "We're ready," she said simply. And I knew she was right. Whatever was coming, we were ready. In the days that followed, a strange calm seemed to settle over me. All the anxiety and anticipation I had felt over the past few years seemed to have melted away. In its place was a sense of peace and acceptance. I decided to spend the days before September 20th with my family. I canceled all lectures and appointments. We wanted to be together, quiet, centered, when the moment came. On the evening of September 18th, we gathered in our living room. The children, sensing the importance of the moment, were surprisingly quiet and reflective. Sarah prepared a simple dinner, and we ate in silence, each lost in our own thoughts. After dinner, we sat in a circle on the living room floor. We light candles, creating an atmosphere of calm and contemplation. Together we meditate, each in our own way. I could feel an energy building around us, as if the air itself was charged with possibility. When I opened my eyes, I saw that everyone was looking at me, waiting. I smiled, feeling a surge of love for my family, for all the people in my life who had supported me on this incredible journey. "I don't know what will happen tomorrow," he said softly. "It could be something big and obvious to everyone, or it could be something subtle that we'll only notice over time. It could even be that nothing happens the way we expect." I paused, letting my words sink in. Then I continued. "But what I know is this. Each of us has an important role to play in what's to come. No matter what happens, our job is to remain open, compassionate, and ready to help in any way we can." Sarah squeezed my hand, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Our children nodded solemnly, their young faces serious in the candlelight. As we prepared for bed, I couldn't help but feel grateful. Grateful for the incredible journey I had experienced so far. Grateful for the wonderful family I had by my side. Grateful for the opportunity to be part of something bigger than myself. Lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, I whispered one last prayer before falling asleep. May we be ready for whatever comes. May we be instruments of light and love in this world. And so on the eve of the day I had waited for so long, I fell asleep. My dreams that night were filled with golden light and promises of a new dawn. What would the next day bring? I didn't know, but I was ready to find out.